And now you are now listening to the new Renegade podcast. And the person I'm going to be interviewing, his name is Pasquale Marco Veltri. He is a comic writer, illustrator, family man, creative, visionary, all that stuff in between. I met him actually at a Comic-Con down in Mississauga in 2022. We had a great conversation. I haven't seen him or spoken to him since, but I'm going to be interviewing him, and we're going to be discussing everything from comics to the state of comics, what inspired him to be a writer in the first place, where his famous comics in the past, in the present, and maybe he can give us a little bit of a preview what he's going to do in the future. So, it's going to be a very, very fun episode on the way. So we're just waiting to see. You know, all the kinks are ironed out and stuff. So I came across Painting My Life, actually, at Mississauga Expo 2022. It's actually a funny story how I even went there. My mom saw this thing on Instagram pertaining to a comic expo in Mississauga, and she got a brochure down Square One, actually, before that. And then a couple weeks later, I thought about it. I didn't want to go, but I went there thinking, you know what, probably not there. And I went there, had the best experience, probably my favorite experience before this one that just happened a couple weeks back. And I really, really loved the passion I saw, the creativity, and all in between. So, you know, and this comic especially caught my attention because sort of the dazzling art, the interesting backstory, the story in general I really love. Because it's a simple story. I mean, the story is a painter named Alice begins to believe that she can walk into her own paintings, you know, traveling world within her paintings allowed her to escape reality of her own life, you know, and then there's a dream world that she created where it's gargoyles and witches, they're at war, and all the stuff that I love. And it's a great look. It's a very cool concept. And, you know, now hopefully it can get adapted in the future. So now we have him on board. 3, 2, 1, go. Hi. Hello, how you doing, man? How you doing?
I'm all right.
How's your day going?
A little busy with some meetings, but then after 2, I can just hang out and do whatever I got to do. What about you?
I'm doing good. Just want to let you know that that this could be audio based. If you're okay with that.
Okay. Sure.
So what have you been doing recently in terms of just, you know, the comics stuff? I know you've been doing some other comics on the side as well.
Well, it takes a lot of time, right? So you're always kind of finishing one thing as you're prepping another thing and trying to organize, you know, the team together. So we finished the collected version of Painting My Life, I guess, earlier this year.
Yeah.
And that involved, you know, adding a bunch of new pages, like 20 new pages, and then redoing the lettering and putting it all back together. So really we were packaging that as I was writing 2 other things, and now it's sort of like, which one is possible? So a lot of the times when whether you're making a comic or any other kind of content, you know, a film or a video, whatever it is, it's like, what am I allowed to do in the next 6 months?
Yeah.
Where's the funding? Are the people around? So you sort of have 3 or 4 paths that you can follow, and then you kind of follow the one that you're allowed to go in. So I think at this time of the year, what I'm usually doing is prepping and planning and seeing, what am I allowed to do next year? When can it be done? And, you know, where are we going to release it? And then we, you know, slowly start, you know, I think I'm always saying to the artists, like, one step at a time. you know, you get one panel, one page, or you're doing one shot or whatever it is. It's always like, what can you do?
Yeah.
And once you figure that out, then you move forward on it.
Yeah, this was funny actually. I asked you on Instagram about going to the 2024 Mississauga Comic Expo. You said you were busy, but I went there, and my God, it was just such a fun experience. And that library, it was a perfect place. It was buzzing, it was busy. Everybody felt like they were having a great time. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great location. They were in the Living Arts Center for a year or two when the renovations were happening. But I remember being there maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And it's a really great place, great location. A lot of families coming with, a lot of. There's a good space to be able to interact with other creators, and there's great workshops. So they really have a great convention going there.
Yeah, for sure. It's so funny actually, because when I first came across you and Painting My Life, I was sort of I was automatically drawn to the cover, and funny enough, I remember I told you this, that Alice looked like kind of like Barbara Gordon of the Bat Family. I know you kind of laughed at that.
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways you always kind of have a generic character, but in a lot of ways, Alice is kind of just me. So I have those glasses, and I kind of looked like that when I had longer hair. So it was more like every artist draws them slightly differently. So definitely the cover that we have for the completed collection, does tend to look, I guess, a little bit like Barbara Gordon. But it's more of like, I don't want to say generic, but it tends to lean a little bit more towards sort of what I look like a little bit. But it's changed slightly over the years. But Ian has kept it pretty consistent on the internal pages, and the cover artist always has a little bit of leeway, to put their own spin on it.
I love that answer actually, because I actually read a couple pages of the Painting My Life comic, and one of the things that I really like about it, it's like it changes. The setting changes every time, and I always appreciate that, because one of the issues I had with comics in general now, mainstream wise, like the setting never changed at all. Like they're doing the same thing in the same location, and I'm like, can't you guys do it somewhere else to change it up, kind of? So yeah,
they're sort of locked into the location. It has to be Metropolis or Gotham, and it has to look a certain way, and they always try to mix it up. But with us, if we look through the pages, it's hard to even look at it now, because you see the evolution of yourself as a creator, because this started maybe 8 years ago now, and then the pages came together. We're doing one issue every 6 months or something, and we finally got everything together. So you kind of see, other people see a comic, and we see the history of us learning how to walk in terms of comic creating. So Ian doesn't even like looking at some of the earlier pages, and that's where we kind of went back to repackage a little bit, to just help everything kind of meld back together, because really the whole comic is just about us learning how to tell stories in the medium over, I guess, almost 10 years now. And then, carefully deciding what's going to be next based on what we learned.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So what was the comic that inspired you to do comics in general? It was sort of like comic you saw and you're like, man, if he can do this, why can't I do this type of thing?
Well, it's more just like a very visual medium that I was drawn to, and I remember like seeing like the first release of Arkham Asylum, like the hardcover, because it just came out. And I didn't even know what it was, and I just got it. And then you flip through it, and it's a painting. It's literally abstract at times. It looks very different. And then there was also they were doing reprints of the many deaths of Batman at the time, and as a series, like three or four issues. I think it was 3 issues of he's just dead. What's going on? So that was sort of like when they started going back to like arcs and things like that, and a bunch of like classic X-Men, the repackaging of that, and for me, like some of the Doom Patrol stuff. So I guess Grant Morris for me was a big influence. Just that kind of broke things up. And just changed the way things were told a little bit in a little bit different way, and visually it was always different. But there's so many influence over the years that you kind of don't even know, because you see so much stuff. But it bounces around, and now lately we've been looking at like the monstrous stuff, which just blows your mind. There's so much good stuff being made, and like the work of Ram V right now, like he's just like the mythology and the thing that he builds, the multi-layered, like crazy textual stuff that he's doing. You're like, let me get the dictionary. You're like, what's he saying? So like that stuff that is just like 5 levels, 10 levels above your head. That's why you become more interested in it.
I mean, that's the thing about influence in general. It's like you can get influenced by something and you don't even know about it. Everything's kind of at a subconscious subconscious level. But one thing I want to speak to you about was like on your Instagram, you post a lot over there, and there was a couple posts that it seemed like you were shooting something, like you were filming something.
Yeah, we're working on so basically, as I was saying at the beginning, like what are you allowed to do this year? So we had I had a story about kind of like it's for me, it's really about the way forward and like fear of the future.
Yeah.
And it kind of dissolved into this idea of, for some unknown reason, there's doors all over the planet, and anyone that goes through the door disappears.
Yeah.
And you don't know where they went. So
yeah.
It's a very similar in my life where you kind of jump in and out of things.
Yeah.
And it probably takes another year to finish. So sometimes you have an idea that can't be a comic. And I come back from a background of painting and photography and filmmaking. So it's just images that tell a story. So in this case, we were lucky enough to be able to sort of shoot that project. And when the opportunity comes, you just have to be ready and make it happen. And probably a year before it's finished, but it's just called The Doorway. And it's a lot about the fear of the future, fear of AI. And, it's just, the unknown.
Right.
Like used to know what was going to happen, and now it seems every 2 or 3 years there's a disruption everywhere where that doesn't happen anymore. You were going to do this, now it's done automatically, or you were going to have all your stuff on this digital space, and now comicsology's gone. Like everything keeps changing and changing and changing. And it's not like it used to be would change every 5-6 years or something. Now it's like every 6 months. It feels like there's a massive sea change coming that can completely upend most industries.
You're so right about that. I mean, I saw this interview that Denzel Washington did back when he was doing promo for Fences. He did an interview with this BBC reporter in London. He was talked about what is the consequence of too much information. He talked about the polarization of the electorate. He talked about every day something else. Now it feels like every hour is something else. And that was from 2016. I mean, that's not even that long ago. So, I mean, it's very hard to adapt, but you have to just keep moving forward, Yeah,
you have to be really focused on what can you do like this year? What are you building towards next year? What's your 3 to 5 year kind of plan? Because some projects take that long. Like most comics, take that like 6 months to a year, depending on what you're doing, and everybody's got to be coordinated. You just need one person to be laid on a page, and there goes a month. And same with any like digital project or film you're working on. It's a team of people coming together, and maybe the financing was there, and then it's gone for a month. Things get delayed. It seems like everything takes 3 to 5 years. So be careful when you start, because that's how long it's gonna take.
Yeah, it does. It does feel like that. I mean, you see like. For example, I don't know why, but I watched this movie called Red Ones. It started like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Chris. Yeah, and that costed like $200 million. And I watched it. I'm like, what am I watching? Like this feels like a CW show. No offense, but like it didn't need to be that much, right?
Yeah, because there's no middle. There's only $250 million movies and micro budget movies, or like $200 million, $2 million, and then there used to be a middle, like, in the 70s and 80s, you had movies like Taxi Driver and, all the independent movies, Live and Die in LA, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The mid-range drama is gone, and, there's hundreds of, like, lots of information about this online, but basically everybody went to tent poles. You can blame Jaws or whatever movie you want to blame that made too much money, so everybody started doing these tentpole movies. And now with Marvel and stuff, it's more an event. And we have some things that are a little bit different now, but it just seems everything is all or nothing.
Yeah,
so
it's not just in movies. It's just like you see it in sports where like teams be going all in, and you're like, you didn't need to do that. Like your core is young. Why are you dumping everything to do something, even though in your heart you're not gonna win, right? So,
it's kind of like politicians. They have 4 years to do something, so they're not really looking forward to the future. It's only the next 2 or 3 years to get reelected, and for normal humans, they have 2 years to keep their jobs. So they have to make it look like they're doing something, I guess. Yeah,
that's so true. That's so true. But you do mention some movies. But does the movies that you watch does that influence the way you write and the way you draw and stuff like that?
Well, I'm not actually an artist. I do draw my characters sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I do paint my own, but I don't do my own pages.
Yeah.
I'm too slow.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything influences you. It's everything you see, everything you read. And I found there's this simple story I can tell you about what I was doing. Like 5 or 6 years ago, I
Yeah.
was reading like all the award-winning books. So anything that won a Man Booker,
Yeah.
or the Book of the Year, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they're usually very sad
Yeah.
movies about tragedy somewhere on a different part of the world, and they're
Yeah.
trying to highlight it. And I kept reading these books, watching the award-winning movies that were all sad, and then I was wondering why I was sad. So I kind of filter. Really, the hardest part now is curation. You're
Yeah.
curating what you put into you. What you put in is what you get out.
Yeah.
So I do still watch award-winning stuff, but not only that now. And I've kind of gone back to why is like The Hobbit such a touchstone for everybody?
Yeah.
So I've gone back to like what's good, but also popular.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to sit around and be influenced by the non-linear sad movie
Yeah.
that's in German. That's wonderful. But then how do you turn that into something that is then a relatable thing that you can use to tell a story
Yeah.
to actually get an audience? So I was trapped a few years of just always, interested in what's supposed to be the best. And
Yeah.
then that kind of, you get curated by other people.
Yeah.
And I think you have to start curating yourself. And
Yeah.
a lot of times I'm actually looking for what is like the most popular book of the year or popular movie, but why?
Yeah.
Why is this different and creative? So
Yeah.
it seems like it takes like, if we go backwards, it's like everywhere, I can't even see the name of the movie, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah.
And then you go backwards, it's like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind,
Yeah.
The Matrix. Like there's those movies that just hit.
Yeah.
And they're
just
like,
do.
this is so different and
Yeah.
new. What is this?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing you kind of look for. I think Strange Darlings is
Yeah.
a kind of an indie movie that sort of does that, but it's just really like a blender of everything else, but it's still well done. So I think I'm looking for that stuff. And the new All In stuff from
Yeah.
DC, they're really trying to change things up and make it a little bit different. So it comes down to like what you want to be influenced by. And so it's hard to curate with all the streaming platforms, you could sit decision paralysis, just trying to decide what you're going to watch.
Yeah.
So it's like eating your vegetables so that you don't, spit out the bad stuff. Like if you sit there watch Red One 20 times, you're probably not going to learn much about storytelling, but you kind of go back. So I'm trying to like be very careful as to what I consume, and look for recommendations from like writers I admire or creators that I admire. Like if someone recommends it and I like their work, then I can trust it. So that's sort of what I've been doing in terms of picking the content that I actually look into.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer, because I was watching a podcast by the guy Brett Easton Ellis, the guy who did American Psycho, and he said the same thing about curation. Where we're living in an age where, like, the digital information age, where you have unlimited choice, but you kind of don't really have a choice. Like it's like
no,
right? It's kind of like but before you had to go into a store. You have to look through the vinyls or the DVDs, or you had to go to Blockbuster to get something for a couple days. And you would essentially were forced to make a decision. Now you're kind of like, okay, all right, I don't know about that. It's just like, it's interesting. It's kind of a paradox type of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of our lives being curated by the algorithm we've created over the years of clicking on things. So I always see like, what is the retro movie they're re-releasing on 4K that is supposed to blow your mind?
Yeah.
Like, you have to watch Planet of the Vampires because it influenced the first Alien, and now it's available in 4K. Like, that's the kind of stuff I get, right? Plus the new comic and the new book. Yeah. So, like, we get curated advertising.
Yeah.
So it's so good, and it's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
And you have to say, well, do I really need to see this movie from the 60s that influenced Alien? And you're like, maybe I do, maybe I don't. So it's kind of hard to step away from the stuff that you've always liked and get out of your little bubble. Because we're all in like our little filter bubbles or whatever they actually call it.
Yeah.
And to pick something different that you normally wouldn't pick up because they know what you like so well that you're only shown that, and you can kind of live in a little filter bubble and never read something different. Yeah,
that's a great answer. You mentioned that you added on 20 new pages for Painting My Life. Can you kind of sort of give us a synopsis of the direction of that story and where it's going in the future?
But right now we sort of have an encapsulated arc of, finding out that what she paints comes true.
Yeah.
Going to the world where she doesn't understand what's happening, and eventually understanding that what she paints can solve her problems. And every time she paints something, she kind of creates a solution, but also a new problem.
Yeah.
So there was sort of a backstory that was missing, and transitional stuff.
Yeah.
So we kind of added 2 or 3 pages per book to help with the transitions from issue to issue.
Yeah.
And also a lot of another stuff we added was a lot of our extra alternative covers and a map.
Yeah.
To our imaginary world.
Yeah.
And just the packaging of stuff, especially when you go back and re-letter, because originally I lettered everything, which is always a mistake, but you didn't have the money at the time, and then we went back to make sure we got professional lettering, and pre-packaged everything, and now it's a standalone little story that stands on its own legs just a little bit better with just a little extra pages here and there. So really it is 15, 20 pages, but there's only 2 or 3 pages per issue, so they don't all get new pages. It's more of, at the beginning there's 4 or 5 pages that kind of connect things a little bit better.
Yeah.
And the backstory that we knew was missing, because at the time we didn't think we had the pages for it, the money at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're essentially saying that there won't be, will there be, a sequel to this story, or is it done?
Yeah, there is, there's I want to say unlimited, but there's 4 other, arcs that I know that we can do. But before we get to that, we sort of want to try a couple other things. We're working on kind of a horror story, and then also a time travel one.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, you kind of want to go in a new direction before you keep making the same thing.
Yeah.
I want to see what the market wants. What I want. You kind of need a break from your characters sometimes.
Yeah.
And you kind of can get just trapped in your own filter bubble of your own little stories.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the idea of changing yourself through your work kind of thing. If you keep telling the same story, you don't really grow.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. Because it's this kind of a more of an extreme example, but Diary of a Wimpy Kid dropped a new book. I forgot the guy's name, but he dropped a new book recently. And everybody is complaining about how the story is not progressing. The characters, they aren't getting any older. It's the same thing over and over again. And now what you said was very important, because it helps for a writer to diversify their portfolio, even though the fans might not be happy at the moment, type of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of just like curating, what you read and what you watch. You have to kind of curate your own stories that you want to get out there. So there may be 10 things you want to make, but what's the one that you have to make?
Yeah.
And, kind of felt that Pain in My Life had a closure that we want to sort of step away from and kind of feel it for a while, and then move into these 2 other little stories that we're starting to work on, doing character turnarounds for now, and then see one's more of a straight ahead time travel story that is more mainstream. The other one is something we want to do a little bit more experimental, maybe some watercolor. Yeah. And we're doing tests. We're starting tests on panels, that are a little more fluid. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So my thing is, so do you have a year where you might go back to Painting My Life? Will we have to wait a couple years for you sort of get back into it, or will it be for a while?
I think it's probably a year and a half or so. We have a side story for Kibu, one of the characters, that kind of tells the story of how he became an unnamed gargoyle. Yeah. And then it's sort of a continuation to this where, there's sort of a world build where within her paintings, there's another stage of the story where the gargoyles and the witches within the story are fighting. Yeah. And so that was more like an off to see the witches kind of story, to solve a problem, to make people create peace, and then the third kind of arc is more about them breaking through the painting and coming into the real world. Oh, okay. So it's it's a multi it's one of those things that it feels so big I have to make it small. Yeah. To do it in pieces. So really, you could do this. I could do it for decades if I wanted, with the amount of stuff that's there. But it's sometimes you need to step away from it to see which part should be the next part of the story, because there's too many pieces, and sometimes you need something smaller. So we're definitely trying to do something more self-contained for some of the other stuff, and maybe even some one-off stuff to see. And it's also just the amount of, before you start making those pages, you've got to be sure that this is the one that you want to do for the 3 years, right?
That's a great answer. Who was the most famous person to like your work within the comic industry or outside of that?
I don't know if I can even name drop right now, but there's because we've been lucky enough to have a table at the Toronto Comic Con, in the Artist Alley for maybe 7 or 8 years now. So not that you lose the names, but we know that people have walked by and stopped. And the difference now is like we have more than one book. So the difference now, like it's like anything, it takes years, right? It's more about slowly becoming part of the community, because at first everyone's like, who's this person? And then it's like by year 8 they start to recognize your face. And now we're like from time to time invited to in stores and things, and we did try like going to comic cons that are a little further off, but then it doesn't always become financially viable. So like if it comes down to like time and money, like can you really travel to every Comic-Con every weekend? And if you can, that's great, but it comes down to then you have to work, you have other things that you have to do, and you have to write the pages at the same time. So it's really, you have to be really lucky to line all that stuff up. So for us, it's just being allowed to exist is, I think, more important than the famous person that we might have seen. Because I could dump some names, but I don't really want to. It's more of like the fact that we're allowed to exist is more important than that, because the book exists, and I think that's the success. I think sometimes we get lost in traveling around and signing stuff and feeling like some kind of famous writer or creator. But in the end, it's the work that matters. And if you can't make the work, then you don't want to travel around with the same 30 pages, right? So that's the other thing. So once we launch the other book, probably mid or late next year, then we'll definitely start doing more cons than we are now. But it is a little bit of a blur. But the thing is, the difference now, other creators will walk by our table, see our covers and our work, and just walk by with a thumbs up. And that means more to me than any famous person.
That's a great answer, because the thing with the sort of kind of the creators in my space and the influencers is that like it's a sort of constant chase of validation. Like someone liking a post or a tweet is the equivalent of having like a 50-minute or an hour conversation with the person. I'm like, no, it's not, right? It's two totally different things. And sort of this constant chase of validation and recognition is kind of like ruining the whole point. Like the whole point is for you to enjoy your work and to sort of allow other people to join your world and enjoy it with you, type of thing, right?
Yeah, I think I don't know the math exactly, but I think it's like everyone needs about 1,000 people who follow their work to be able to sustain it forward. And those 1,000 people don't have to they just have to be around to support you when the time comes. Yeah,
that's a great answer. On the topic of adaptations, so has anyone sort of come forward and say, hey, we're interested in adapting your work, or we're interested in this or that? Has anyone come forward and said that about Painting My Life?
Well, it's sort of, you can say it's a means to an end or something, but the reality is it's a very complicated system of someone there's companies that buy their rights to sell it to other people. So it's like there's a lot of steps and stages in the way. So, of course, that would be great. And we were talking to some people about some animated stuff, but it takes years and money, and it's a little bit like that would be wonderful, but I don't think it's something we're really chasing after right now, just because of how, I don't have to say saturated the market is, but how controlled it is. So it's something that we're ready for, of course, and have other things that can be done. And we're probably going to do a 3-minute something in the future. But if you kind of chase after that stuff, you just have to keep making good work. And then eventually I think that comes to you if they think that it's something they can sell. So the market changes all the time, and they're making Red 1, so they don't really want to make so it kind of, it's more of make the good work, and then it'll either come to you or it won't. I think automatically chasing after adaptations. If you know the right people, you can do it. Like you have an agent and you know somebody who knows someone at DreamWorks or whatever it is.
Yeah,
you can go and pitch. But it's a lot more complicated than it seems.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying stay in your lane, but I think that the work has to come first. So we're more interested in creating good work and moving forward with that, and keep making pages. It would be, of course, wonderful, but I don't know how realistic it is to start with that idea.
That's the thing, right? You see a lot of creators and writers and authors, they immediately sell their work, and we have a situation like Aragon or Percy Jackson. We're like, if you just allow the work to sort of kind of marinate a little bit, and allow the studios to kind of, I don't know, take their time with it, then we have a whole different type of result. But my question for you is that who would be the person that you want to see direct Painting My Life if it ever turned into like an animation or a live action or whatever?
Well, again, like pie in the sky dream stuff, we would be involved, right?
Yeah.
Whether it be animation or real.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of I think that's it. The problem with the way Marvel has moved forward and all this other stuff, there's this idea that a comic directly moves to film.
Yeah.
But I think we took a class with Ty Templeton years ago. He had a comic book boot camp.
Yeah.
And he explained that the difference between film and comics is that film is passive, and a comic exists in the gutter because you're reading between the panels, and your mind makes up what's in between the gutter. And so it's not the same medium. I think we've been told we think it's the same because of the transition that's been made. There's so many adaptations.
Yeah.
But it's a completely different medium, a different way of telling a story.
Yeah.
And it has its own rules and its own market. So the transition back and forth is much more difficult than people think it is. And I'm lucky enough to make some tiny little film projects here and there, but they're never at the budget that could afford to tell these kinds of stories. So I think an animated version would be great in the future, but I think that would be years away and very expensive. So I don't want to. For me, it's like, can we even make another comic? Like, I'm not even thinking about, can this be a movie right now? Can we make another page?
Yeah.
One thing at a time.
Yes, that's great. Last question I wanted to say about, adaptation. So you see this trend where projects get announced that people are like fan casting, and I'm like, you guys are not even allowing the people to actually make the decision. But if in a world where this comic is actually like a moving thing, who would you want to see play Alice? Then I'll give my own opinion on it.
Well, whoever. Honestly, I worked with an actor recently who was in a short. I don't want to work with that person, but it's sort of like, I don't think you'd get the choice of who that would be.
Yeah.
But the name escapes me. But whoever was an alien Romulus might age
Katie
up
Sweeney?
enough to play. Yeah, I think the lead of that would be fun. But again, these are dangerous delusions to when really you just want to think about what's the next book, what's the next pages, and I think we're all caught up in how things are changing and growing. It all seems to be so connected, but it's so different. And who knows what the future is going to be, right?
Yeah.
Right now we have, how many comic book stores are left? How many movie theaters are left? Like, maybe this will be adapted into Roadblocks, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what the future, like, if you think how people are interacting and working right now, in 10 years, they could be making stories that exist within a virtual space.
Yeah.
So does it even have to be a movie? Could it be an animated, interactive something? Because
Yeah.
I know that with my niece and with younger people, they live in Roadblocks, or they live in Minecraft. So they don't even go to the movies. They don't read comics. They go to their interactive space.
Yeah.
They meet in a virtual space. They play games with each other there.
Yeah.
And who knows where your content can live in the future, let alone, cast here and there. So I think it's more of looking forward to see where your story can go in terms of not just virtual spaces, but how can you keep the print alive, let alone all these other things? Because, if you look back and forward, it's like it's up and down. It's like we're in a downturn now because comics went really bad, really up in the pandemic because people had time and to do stuff. And now that's kind of gone down, and it looks like now we're sort of going back up.
Yeah.
So I think that I know it's great to speculate and all this stuff, but I think my goal is survival. It sounds so silly, but just how can I keep making stuff, whether it's a comic book, a film, or just a written story.
Yeah.
And what am I allowed to do? And I always go back to the Bruce Lee quote of like, be like water.
Yeah.
You're kind of ready, and you go. You see, if it's a cup, you become the cup. Where are you allowed to go? And my joke is that I'm like erosion. Slowly, surely, I move forward, and I grow at a speed that I don't notice.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of in any art form. It's like you don't even see yourself getting bigger or growing or knowing where you think what's going to end up, or even if you're going to be able to keep going at what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not depressing. This is positive. My goal is survival.
Yeah.
Can I keep have the confidence to keep writing and creating in whatever platform it is, and how do I make sure that is possible?
Yeah. Yeah, I 1,000% agree with what you said. And that's the thing, right? Is a lot of people seem to think that, I'm starting out this podcast, right? I'm kind of lucky some of the guests I've already got. I got some people with like 10K, 20K followers on their social media. So they have some type of clout. But it would take someone else years to even like get someone like that. But it's all a process. And sometimes you can't, jump from the base of K2 all the way to the top of the Himalayas. In a quantum leap. Yeah. It takes time. And as for the person that I think could play Alice, there's a couple people in my mind. You mentioned Kaylee Speeney. I think that would be great. There's two other people I think would do a really good job. These people are older than Alice. Maybe you can age her up. I don't know, but I think Haley Steinfeld or Millie Bobby Brown would do a really good job. Granted, that's the world's away. But
worlds away, and then by the time it would make, they would be 10 years older.
Yeah,
and you did mention that mountain climbing kind of stuff. So I think one of my favorite quotes comes from I forget the interviewer, but they were talking about a famous climber.
Yeah,
and they asked him, "How come you're so successful at this? Why can you climb things nobody else can climb?" And the answer was like, "How long are you willing to suffer?
Yes.
How long are you willing to work for that one thing?"
Yeah.
Were you willing to suffer more than anyone else? So again, it's not. I don't mean to sound depressing, but like that's what you're. It's sort of a struggle to keep going.
Yeah.
You're not climbing a mountain, but struggle to make that next panel or make that next page.
Yeah.
To not pay attention to all the noise online.
Yeah.
And how you keep going and how you convince yourself not to give up.
Yes,
I think is really where I'm at still. I love the idea of picking these things and thinking of the future.
Yeah,
but it's like you have 6 months, and then you have the 6-month plan, the 3-month plan, and the 5-year plan. And, if you can't survive the 3 months, how can you do the 5-year plan? So sometimes I look at what happened to music. You think about how music used to sell things and printed stuff, vinyl, records, CD, online, and now it's just streaming platforms and subscription.
Yeah.
So they were the first to go digital, really. So now that's happening to movies, and how does it affect everything else? And where are we going to be in 5 years?
Yes.
So it's like all you can do is keep doing your work and then be ready to put it on whatever platform you're allowed to put it on.
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny you're talking about like AI and digital stuff. When the first thing when I hear that stuff comes to my mind is Tron Legacy. Have you ever watched Tron Legacy?
Yeah.
All right. So I love that movie to death. It's my favorite movie ever. It's my favorite piece of art ever. And the one thing. There's that one line. This is a very like banal scene, and it was like beginning of the movie, and they're having a meeting, and one of the secretary people, forgot her name. One secretary people said that something about how NCOM has made the most amount of money profit wise, but you see in the atmosphere of the movie that's not really a great thing because they lost the soul of what they used to be, which was a gaming sort of institution. Right, so
so that's what's happening. Like things keep changing, and you don't know how it's going to change, and it seems like The ability to produce art comes down to really, and not I want to say entitlement, but luck and timing and hard work. And we're moving backwards to where like rich people are allowed to do art. And unless you have a patron, it's hard for you to make art.
Yeah.
And, patreon.com, Kickstarter, all this stuff. It's
Yeah.
like we're moving. Did we ever really leave the 1400s where only people who have the time and the money and the privilege are allowed to create? So when you're competing with people who have the time, the money, and the privilege, how do you keep going?
Yeah.
So it seems like a negative thing to say, but you have to accept that's the reality. Like the Tron example there, the future being controlled completely, and but it comes down to just adapting and just doing your work.
Yeah,
I think I keep saying that, but if you have to be able to just keep making stuff on your own terms and find a way to keep going.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'm gonna ask you a couple of sort of rapid fire questions. What is your favorite movie ever?
Favorite movie ever would be really hard, and I think Letterboxd has this thing where they're like, "What are your favorite 4 movies?"
Yeah.
So, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, The Matrix, Parasite, and I lean back and forth between, I guess, Casablanca and some other things. I think the answer is there's too many of them.
Yeah.
It's like, what's your favorite movie right now, or what's like over the years, like sometimes there's movies that you carry with you, like you watch them enough that those movies become your friends. So there's movies I watch when it's snowing, there's movies I know I watch at different times of year. There's just they become, it's like when you hear a song enough, it feels better to you because you're used to it now. The first time you hear the song, you don't like it, but you've watched some movies so many times that you're not watching them from memory, but you kind of are. So there's just comfort movies, and so it's hard. I think it'd be impossible to pick the best. But it's sort of like which ones have just stuck with you, and I think for me those are the ones. But it changes. It's like a moving target. It does
change. Who's your favorite couple of directors that inspire you? Movie directors.
Well, this is something that if I could go on and on with this one too, but for me, what I did years ago was like I'd watch 6 movies from one director, and sort of get an idea of what their work was like. So we all start off with watching the Spielberg stuff, and David Fincher and all that big stuff from that time, from Christopher Nolan and all those big names. But what happened for me is like you're just seeing. I don't know how old I must have been, but I saw Spielberg talking about E.T. and then it was a documentary on Spielberg. And then he started talking about David Lean and Lawrence Arabia. And I had no idea who David Lean was. So, of course, to like a 12-year-old kid, the first thing I do is go find David Lean movies. So in terms of like the visual impact and, just the giant scope of filmmaking. There's a lot of David Lean movies that I've probably watched probably hundreds of times. Even like things like Passage to India that he made. But I think for me, it's more the Lawrence Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, which I think I've watched so many times that they become my friends. And even like Spielberg's version of The Color Purple, I must have seen that a bunch of times. I can't even know how many times. Like that's, you watch it every year. So you didn't even know a movie could be a musical at that time. I didn't even know that when I first saw that. And then, it goes over time. Then eventually I saw like a David Cronenberg movie. I'm like, what is this? I didn't even understand what it was. It doesn't mean it became my favorite filmmaker. I'm just like, what? I didn't know what it was. So it's every film or every book that kind of opens your mind to something different. So for me, it kind of starts with Spielberg and Lucas stuff, goes to David Lean, and transitions to Fincher and to Scorsese and all that kind of stuff. And now, it's more of the smaller stuff that can impress you. So this is maybe another podcast when you have an hour or so. And I can collect
I got time to kill, but the thing about one of my favorite directors actually is Joseph Kosinski. He directed Tron Legacy. He did Oblivion. He did the new Top Gun movie a couple years back. The one thing I'm very, very impressed by is his commitment to efficiency. All his movies are completely streamlined. That's not in the best way possible, where you can watch it in any setting, in any context, and you completely understand what he's trying to do, what he's trying to go for, and the whole story, right?
Yeah.
One of the other ones I really loved was Hitchcock, and more specifically Vertigo. It's such a funny story. When I first watched Vertigo, my dad was just flipping through channels, and one of the channels had Vertigo playing, and we watched it. And my dad was kind of, I don't know, he liked it. My mom was kind of confused by it. My brother he was sleeping in his bed, and I watched it the whole thing through. I didn't really like it, and then that whole era, I became obsessed with this whole era. It was probably like the 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
And I got into this artist named Lana Del Rey, and her whole discography references that era. And I was so obsessed with her, and I rewatched Vertigo around that time, and I absolutely loved it. So again, it maybe takes another rewatch, another frame of mind to enjoy something like that.
Yeah, and then one film will lead to another.
Yeah.
Like you watch that, and then eventually you might end up seeing like Billy Wilder stuff from earlier on, or Kurosawa, and you just jump around. And, and eventually, I think I was led to like a filmmaker called Sidney Lumet.
Yeah.
He makes like just, a lot of courtroom dramas and stuff. The simplicity of the way that his stuff comes together.
Yeah.
So it's just you go from like growing up on like crazy Michael Bay stuff to like learning to appreciate Sidney Lumet stuff, where it's like one shot moves from a wide shot to a two shot to a close up back to a wide, and then ends in a different close up or over the shoulder. And so a very slow one shot scene in compared to what we were all growing up on, like the ADD cutting of 12 frames a second and all that kind of stuff. So it's just so different to see how storytelling has changed over the decades. And that's, you can get lost in that too. Sometimes you can get trapped in a decade for too long, and then it affects your work, and you start making stuff that's not current. So that's another problem. Right.
Yeah, that's a great point to have. But all the award seasons they're coming into the play. Oscars, Golden Globes, everybody's predicting. But what's your favorite movie of this year, and why?
Well, I don't know if I saw enough movies this year. It's been one of those years. I'm trying to even remember. Like, did we even go out? I didn't know if I went to the theater that many times. I went to. I got to this one. You surprised me with this one. This one I'm gonna have to think about.
Yeah.
There's definitely movies I know I'm supposed to see. That's the joke from earlier, where like the internet is telling me I have to see The Brutalist, I have to see Anora.
Yeah.
And all these artsy, very well made, passionate movies that will probably make me sad.
Yeah.
But just haven't got to Gladiator 2 or Wicked yet.
Yeah.
So I almost have to like think backwards to the top movies of the year and think about what I even saw this year.
Yeah.
Do you have a top pick from this year?
Actually, yeah, I do. I'm gonna say this might surprise some people, because again, I haven't watched that many movies this year in the theaters, but there's one movie that really caught my attention. Is Furiosa. I really, really love that movie. And Anya Taylor-Joy
remember it was this year.
Yeah, it was just released this year. Yeah. Anya Taylor-Joy is that person. She's a monster, bro. Like every single performance, she just puts like 180%. It's like, it's a sight to see. It's a tragedy she doesn't have an Oscar to her name, but that's just how the game goes,
Yeah. Well, it'll happen. She's just so young. So I do kind of, now coming back to the fact that I know that I saw Alien Romulus.
Yeah.
and as much as that was a bit of a throwback, Longlegs was great this year.
Yeah, that's a good movie
about that. I saw that. And Furiosa, I did see that as well.
Yeah.
It's funny how like your brain's like, what even came out this year?
Yeah. And you just remember everything. Who's your favorite actor/actress to watch? It could be from the past, it could be from the present, it could be, in the near future.
Well, it's always a mix of things, right? Like, it's sort of changes and grows, but like, I don't know if there's someone I just go no matter what they're in. But, like, I always think back to like, like moments that, you think are told that are important. Like years ago, the movie called Heat came out.
Yeah.
You had to see it because Pacino and De Niro were in the same scene together. Yeah. Right? So it's stuff like that, like, who hasn't worked together before? I think for me, Meryl Streep. I think I just see everything that she's in.
Yeah.
But it changes and grows. And I don't know if there's like, like a younger person that's really stood out in the same way because they're all still fighting it out.
Yeah.
But I think I'm still attracted to like the older faces. They just like have so much character.
Yeah.
So I think for me it's like the actors that you grew up with.
Yeah.
As they age, like you're sort of aging with them.
Yeah.
A little bit. So when a new person comes out, you need 5 years to sort of have them in your brain.
Yeah. I completely understand how you feel. There's a couple current ones that really like anytime they're in something I gotta watch. You know, Timothée Chalamet, he's amazing. Anya Taylor-Joy I mentioned earlier. Kaylee Sweeney, she's been rising up my list recently. My brother told me about her because he watched Priscilla, and I watched Priscilla recently. She was amazing in that. I mean, but there's a couple ones that I can't stand. I cannot stand Ana de Armas, bro. No offense. Have you watched any of her works?
I think, you see stuff because she's in everything for a while, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. What type? Because you mentioned music influences what you do. What type of music have you been listening to recently?
It's funny about that because I used to, when I did more driving around, I'd be listening to whatever's playing, and then the top 10 song of the month would be in my brain. So that there'd be whatever Taylor Swift or Sia or Dua Lipa song, would be the song that I would know because you hear it's just like what we talked about. You hear it 10 times, and by the 11th time, your brain is used to hearing it, and now it's part of you. But I think there's a book I read recently by Murakami about classical music. He interviewed a famous conductor whose name escapes me now. So what I kind of been doing is sort of going back to some classical stuff. And sort of like, and I don't listen to music when I'm writing, believe it or not. Everybody says, "What's your playlist?" And my brain can't do it for some reason. I need not absolute silence, but I really need that type of quiet to be able to really focus on stuff. But it's a mix of like new stuff and old stuff for me. But can almost just open up my phone and see what I played last. But I think I'm kind of sinking into podcasts about writing more than I'm listening to music these days. But it's always changing. But I think what I've been trying to do is go back and like open my mind more to classical music and stuff. Not that I'm trying to sound all geeky and knowledgeable. It's just more of sometimes the music starts to sound the same. And I'm not one of those people that only listens to what they listened to in high school. In fact, I try to make sure my older music that you from my childhood's not on my phone anymore because you don't need the teen angst anymore. But it is one of those things that.
You're right about, there's a certain guy that I used to listen to a lot. I forgot his name, but now whenever I see him, it's like I can't stand him anymore. It's weird, like that's just how it is. But the one artist I'll always listen to is Daft Punk. I love their music. I always loved their music. It's a tragedy that they split up back in 2021, but their music is always playing in my head. Another one, this is more and more recent one. Billie Eilish, bro. She's special. Like, just straight up. That's another one I want to interview in the future. That's top of my bucket list, type of thing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes the music you listen to kind of sort of just blurs into each other, type of thing.
I think Lorde, her stuff sounds different to me. So I think I've like just the fact I remember her name. That sounds to me. But that book that I mentioned is called Absolutely on Music by Murakami, and it sort of talks to this famous conductor, Osawa or something. I think his name might be, and it just goes about like this door into like conducting and music, and it just teaches you how much you don't know about something. It's like we all think we know something until someone who really knows about it starts talking about it, and opens this big door of of knowledge you had no idea. There's depths and depths to how you conduct music, how they record it, how they play it. And I'm not a musician, so this is all new to me. So I think 5 or 6 years ago I read this book and I kind of went down a rabbit hole of Brahms and Beethoven and all this stuff, and Bernstein and Gould. And it doesn't mean I'm listening to it all the time. It's just like kind of pushed me in a different direction away from the stuff that I used to listen to.
Yeah, for sure. It's so funny you mentioned Rabbit Hole, because I never really told anyone this, but like, there's a time where like most of what I listened to was like jazz oriented, like Miles Davis, Chet Baker, Autumn Falls, all that stuff. And that's what I listened to, and it was very, very interesting, because your mind kind of shifts into more like introspective, kind of melancholic type of vibe. I mean, there was times where I was listening to music and I was looking at like black and white photos of like New York from the 50s and 60s, and it shifts your mind a little bit, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it's especially when you start listening to live classical music.
Yeah,
it just hits differently.
It does.
And again, I'll look up the name of that Canadian. I went to see a Canadian pianist who has his own new albums and stuff.
Yeah,
and just hearing like them play their music in a live space, and just hearing, and then when you hear cellos and stuff, like you just, because you're not used to hearing it. I know some people are always listening to classical music, but I had stopped for a while and I went back to it, and like your different parts of your brain turn on.
Yeah, they do.
Is what it felt like for me when I was listening to this. Like Max Richter is a conductor that makes music for movies that I started listening to a lot of.
Yeah.
And Jean-Michel Blaise, that's his name. So you may not have heard of him, but he's a Montreal pianist who he just releases classical albums where he's making new classical music, and it's a little more upbeat and different, and it's just like you just sort of went down this rabbit hole of like who are contemporary people making classical music, and it's a short list. And I went to the live show, and I kind of just blew my mind being in a small theater. I think it was one of the on Blur. It's downtown where they teach music, and it was a pretty big space, but not that big, so it's almost like you could hear him stop the keys. It's just the music feels so different than when you're just listening, even no matter how good your headphones are. It's just different when it's live.
For sure. So one of the last questions I want to ask you is that so let's say like a big publication, like I don't know, like Image Comics or Marvel or DC, they come up to you and say, hey, we've been checking on your work, we want you to do something for us, or do like a partnership or something like that. Would you be up for it? Would you do it?
Oh, I think that's everyone. Of course, they would do it. It's more of having a team ready and in place and building your team. So when and if that does happen, you have the artist and the letterer and the colorist all ready to go and prepackaged. So we all have the dream story that we're standing by in case that happens. But I think you need to produce your own work so that eventually, once you show them that you don't need them, then they come for you. That's sort of how it works.
So what's the ultimate goal of your work in the next, 5 to 10 years? Like, what's the ultimate goal? What do you want to do? What do you want to see your work turn into?
Well, from my joke continues to be survival.
Yeah.
But it's like, can I still be writing stuff in 3 years, 5 years, 6 months, 2 days? Because all you do is you see people that were trying to do something and then they had to stop. Like, it's easy to chase after art in your 20s and 30s. Then it gets harder and harder. So for me, it's how can I continue to produce work, whether it's a comic or written word or whatever, video or whatever it might be, over the next 5 to 10 years. How can I put myself in a position to keep going? And I know that sounds like it's an easy thing, but there's so many things that get in the way, whether it's a reality of a pandemic or work or whatever it might be. So really it's like, how can you be that water that moves forward and keeps making things? And I would just love to have 3 more collected stories in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, plus, whatever else we can get made. So I think you just have to keep working and be ready in case that person from somewhere else calls. But I think for me, it's just, how can I convince myself to keep going? Essentially.
That's just the reality of it, This might be a little bit of a off topic question, but have you ever had like a celebrity crush when you were younger or even recently?
Well, I think that happens to everybody, but I think sometimes it's like your crush is like, oh my God, how did Ram V do that? Like it's more like you're like seeing some amazing work happen.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Whoa.
how did they even do that? So when you see some like very like, you could drop all the names you want and stuff like, but at a certain point it becomes, like who inspires you, and, so yes, I'm crushing on Ram V and his ability to layer stories with metaphors.
Yeah.
So I think that's my answer.
Yeah, I'm all ears on that. But my last real question before we sign off is do you watch any sports? Do you keep up with that?
Well, I think I refer to sports as sports ball. So I like, I do from time to time. Like I know it's a religion for a lot of people, and like a lot of people follow it all the time. Maybe years ago, but I don't think I've really paid attention to any kind of sport in more than 20 years, probably.
Wow.
And it's just more of a life choice. This is gonna, what do you have time to do? Do you have time to watch 3 football games on Sunday?
Yeah.
Or can you carve out 2 hours or 3 hours to write?
Yeah.
Or to work on the next project? So for me, a lot of what I am allowed, I sound like a monk, but you have to schedule your life in a way where if it's going to get in the way of what you want to do you really need to see that football game or see, 8 hours of golf?
Yeah.
Or whatever it might be. Like I do live events from time to time, but really I been or watched any sports for a very, I think in 2000, whatever, early 2000s, I was watching stuff maybe, but not since then.
Yeah.
Like it's more of, it's not like I have endless focus for things. I get distracted by a lot of stuff, but when it came to sports, it was one of those things that because I wasn't good at sports, I didn't really follow it very much.
That's yeah. I mean, I 1,000% understand you. Maybe the reason why I can get away with watching a lot of sports is because, I'm doing a podcast and you can sort of like kind of do both at the same time because you can just, see certain things and pick out certain intricacies. But I'll recommend you one guy. If you ever have the time, I'll recommend you one guy and one YouTube channel actually to watch. And this isn't about sports, it's about something else. One guy I would recommend you to watch if you have the time to is Patrick Mahomes for the Kansas City Chiefs. The way that he plays the position, the quarterback position, it's kind of like how a great writer writes comics or how a great illustrator illustrates their work. It's artistic. It's just the way that he moves. Like, nobody should be doing what he's doing, but he's doing it at a pace that nobody's ever done it before type of thing, right? So,
yeah, like I'm aware of Steph Curry, and I know how, he's not human. And I've seen the clips, and I watch stuff like that sometimes, or when it gets to the finals and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things that I just never jumped onto. But like when a sports person becomes bigger than life, then I know about them because like Messi or someone who's like just doing stuff that's just for so long, it's just not human.
Yeah, it's not.
And they become inspirational too.
They do.
It's like they're like poets, but in their field.
Yeah, for sure. There's this one YouTube channel. This isn't about sports, but there's one YouTube channel I think you should check out. It's called Cinematic Escapism. It's like a best shots video.
Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of really cool stuff that person's doing. I don't know that person personally, but like they do a lot of cool stuff. So I think you should check them out, and maybe maybe collaborate them on the new project you might be doing with the films and stuff.
Yeah, you got to reach out to everybody. There's a lot of really great compilation stuff online. That can really not just be inspirational, but you can always learn so much just by seeing what people like point out to you that you weren't aware of before.
Well, what's the book you've been reading? Because you mentioned that you were reading a lot of books recently.
So let's see. Right now, I guess I'm looking at. I've got like a little pile right here. So I've got BPRD 1946 to 1948.
Yep.
So like the Hellboy offshoot right in front of me.
Yeah, I heard that one. That's a good one.
The Die by, let me just get the name, Gillian.
Yeah.
And the internet told me I had to watch Wages of Fear. So I have that in front of me too, even though it's kind of slow.
Yeah.
And I looked, there's someone named Cargill who wrote, Cargill, sorry.
Yeah.
Who wrote Doctor Strange and The Black Phone. And he has a podcast that I was listening to, and so I read one of his books recently called The Sea of Rust.
Yeah.
Kind of like in a robot AI kind of world ending kind of stuff. Robots becoming, human, taking on human emotions and that kind of stuff. So there's always a to-read list that seems endless. So that's the other thing, is like making sure not to buy too many books that you haven't read yet. So I try to only read 2 books ahead.
Yeah, for sure. There's one book that I read recently. It's called More Than This, and it's by Patrick Ness, who couples of his work has already been adapted to movies. That book is amazing. Like, that book touches on everything you're talking about. Touches on climate change, AI, what it means to be human, what it means to have a life in general, sexual orientation. Like, it's an incredible book. And I hope to God that somebody can, like, adapt it to something. Anything. I don't care. I want to see it on the screen. But yeah, I think that book, you would really enjoy that.
And I think I'm also going backwards. I've got, I forget, there's a giant H.P. Lovecraft over here.
Yeah.
That I'm looking at, and some Edward Allan Poe, but it's like one of those things, you read them in pieces. It's like you try the next short story and then you put it away and you come back. But it's like similar to doing movies or other books. Like, how much can you really read? Sometimes it's like, it seems like your to-do list of reading is longer than your actual to-do list. So it's almost like, how much time can you allot to that and this?
Yeah.
The scheduling, the joke of scheduling your life so you're allowed to write and read while you have to do all the other reality stuff. Yeah,
for sure. You mentioned that animation, you're interested in putting some stuff in animation. Have you been watching any, like, cartoons? Or have you had any favorite cartoons back in the day when you were a kid or something like that?
Growing up, you saw the Adventures of the Adventures of Batman, the Justice League stuff. But there's just so much stuff coming out now that it's just mind blowing.
It is.
Like, just the amount of the amount of budget that they have, and then the quality and skill. Like, it's just, there's so much stuff. I would hesitate to list it all. Yeah. But like the Arcane stuff, I haven't got to the new season yet. It just kind of blew my mind. The Blue-Eyed Samurai was crazy. It just seems like there's a move towards adult animation.
Yeah, there's a move.
So, it's a pretty big move that's coming, and it made sense during the pandemic because you couldn't shoot things, so more animation was approved. Yeah, and people want it, right? So, and the other great thing is, like, you can watch something like what's it called, The Mystery of Avaros or something that or like that you can then talk to your nieces and nephews about. Yeah. Right? Because like it's not exactly for kids, but it is. Like Troll Hunters was something that I was watching years ago that Del Toro made. Yeah. Where I was able to literally watch it with my nieces and nephews because it was following the same old hero myth, but with interesting character, retelling the Arthurian myth. And it's just like a moving Pixar piece of candy, right? So there really is so much stuff now. Yeah. Again, it's just how much time do you have to watch all this amazing stuff that's being made. But I'm definitely going to make some time for the Arcane season 2 when I can get to it. Yeah. And sometimes I think there's just almost too much good animation right now.
It kind of goes back to kind of the sort of how much, like, what does too much information do to the human psyche type of thing. But there's a lot of cartoons I loved. I mean, when I was younger, SpongeBob and Rugrats, Very Odd Parents, more mainstream stuff. Then I was watching Teen Titans later on. I loved that. And I loved that to death. And just general, like, I was watching some... funny enough, I was watching some Family Guy recently, and you notice certain things. Is like, this is a lot more like artistic than I remember. I used to just think it was just slapstick, but there's a lot more emotion to what
Yeah, you
they're
see
doing.
different things as when you look back at it. And just for me, like sometimes you didn't always watch it in the best conditions, and now
Yeah.
you're watching this new stuff and it has such great audio,
Yeah.
amazing music and voice acting, and it just it's just so compelling
Yeah, it
because
is.
of how good the sound is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you been watching any TV shows?
Yeah, well, you always try to see going through. I guess Star Trek Lower Decks is something that we're going through. But there's just there's so. I'm actually looking back at Lost.
Yeah.
It's hard to. So it's sort of like I'm going back to that and maybe trying to get Mad Men in. So I did watch most of Lost, and Mad Men I never did. So I'm actually going back to, just like with the books that I used to, like, what are the supposed best shows of all time?
Yeah.
And trying to figure, why were they popular? Why were they, and why do you still think about them now?
Yeah.
Like, there's shows that disappear.
Yeah. It's so funny about disappearing shows. There's a show that came out. It ran for like a couple years. It was called Titans. It was based off the Teen Titans. And there's one of the lead actresses, Raven Tegan Croft. I had a big crush on her. I still do.
Yeah.
And I tried to watch that show during during summer break because I'm in college, Pumper Radio Broadcasting, and that show is not that good though. I tried watching it. I appreciate that all the actors and actresses did their best. I like some of the visuals. I like some of the ideas. It just, frankly, there was no need to do it. If you couldn't get that thing down properly, then there's no need, right? But you know what? Money has to
some
be
things
made,
don't age the same, right? Some things are timeless, and then some things seem to live in their time and not quite as watchable now.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the thing. The last thing I'll say is, like, the way that certain people get criticized always sort of rub me the wrong way. And my question to you is, like, how do you deal with criticism? People criticize your work or you personally. How do you deal with that? How do you combat that?
Well, there's two different kinds of criticism, really. There's the ones you ask for, and sometimes you pay for when you get notes from people, right?
Yeah.
And even that can feel weird or not feel good. And if someone's going to stop and take the time to criticize your work in person or online, you have to really think about what's going on in their life that makes them upset.
Yeah.
And I'm not forgiving them. It's like you have to take it, and think about it. Like, is your work really horrible? Does it need to improve? Sure, maybe. Or is this person coming from a different space? And you can usually tell, like the toxic comments that people leave online versus someone saying, you know what, I think this could have better lettering or whatever they're saying. Like, there's a difference between constructive and someone like, just punching down or whatever they're doing. It's taken years probably to even get used to it. Like, because once you put something out there, you can get bad reviews, or people can say whatever they want online, or they can literally pick up your book and put it down and just walk away.
Yeah.
Right. So years ago, I did more photo shows, and I remember you have to get used to people walking in and looking at your photos and leaving within 30 seconds. Right? And that same thing happens at Comic-Cons, right? People are just walking by, and sometimes people stop and say things, and sometimes they stop and say things that aren't great, and you just have to just realize that it can affect you, or it can. It's up to you. Like, you can either, sometimes it's good criticism. Like, it really helps you grow when it's from another writer or from someone who does workshops or something. But you have to see the source. Like, if it's just somebody online, then you can't let it get to you.
Yeah,
but it's like some professional that you respect, and they're actually with their criticism trying to help you, and that's so different. And I think even that criticism takes years to get used to doing. But now, you chase after it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the last thing I'll say about this topic is that there's this one actress that, I think you might know her name, but it was one actress, Millie Bobby Brown. She's part of Stranger Things. She's like the main person. Yep. Some of the criticism I've seen of her from people who don't watch the shows, people who watch other stuff she does, it's just, to me, it goes past from constructive to straight up just personal, making stuff up to discredit someone. Right? And it's just like, to me, I'm like, bro, I don't know what she did, She must have. I'm just like, bro. There's a time and place. Sometimes just people just go way overboard with it. And I'm like,
Yeah,
she didn't do anything.
If you're too popular, people want to cut you down. So that's the other part of the industry, right? Where, there's a lot of people that want to cut other people down. And someone's too successful. That's where that can come from.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard to grow up on screen, right? So a lot of child actors don't make it. So it's a very strange environment.
It is.
And hopefully she's able to ignore it and just continue to be successful.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, right? I mean, it's all kind of, people forget art itself is subjective at the end of the day, Someone might enjoy your work, might hate someone else's work, and vice versa, right? So that's the thing. But I really appreciated this interview, you taking the time to sit down and have this sort of conversation, because my goal of this podcast is to just have a conversation, not be structured, not be overly edited, not to push any type of way or view, just have a real type of dialogue and discourse. So I really appreciate you coming out and having this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you.
I'll see you later.
Bye for now.
Bye. And that is the end of Renegade podcast interview. I hope everyone enjoyed this interview. You can catch me on YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. See you guys later.